Welcome to the Screwup Exchange. My name is Patrick.
Hi, my name is Drasko, and today we have a very special guest in our show. It's, I would say, meanwhile, a long-term friend, Mike Denison. Each of us met Mike long years ago on the different sites in this world. Probably, I think I met Mike 10 years ago, and he's one of the guys that, through his coaching process, changed my way of thinking. So I appreciate this. I think Mike has a really interesting story to share with us today. So Mike, welcome in our show.
Hi, great to see you guys, especially after quite a long time. And thanks very much for inviting me onto your little show today. I'm really pleased to be here with you.
Yeah, very welcome. Yeah, Patrick, I think you met Mike in the United States on a project, right? You guys met there?
Yeah, actually, I met Mike right at the beginning of my lean training. I was on a lighthouse project in Portland where I did a year-long assignment to learn about lean management, lean processes, and that's where I actually got to meet Mike. He was actually training one of the directors now, I believe just directors, no, plant manager now, sorry.
I'm a general manager even.
General manager, thank you. Sorry, Jane Rosen.
Yeah.
And that's when I got to meet him. And then we had a couple of interesting one-on-one discussions that really opened up my eyes and taught me a new way of thinking and how to coach people. And that's how I got to know him.
Mm-hmm. We had some good discussions, didn't we, in the bar and around when we were trying to put the world to rights. I remember them well.
Yeah, it was a really great time. It was a very educational time, but also just a fun time and just having some good beers and good conversations.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, beside that, Mike is a great coach and has his own company, LeanMentor. Mike is also a passionate bike driver. Mike, would you tell us a little bit more about this?
Oh, what do you want to know about my bikes? Bikes and riding are my passion. Anything to do with motorbikes. I've been on motorcycles since I was 16, and you know that's 50 years. That's over 50 years now. That's absolutely crazy. I can't believe how fast time's gone by. And anything to do with bikes, whether it's riding bikes, whether it's touring on bikes, whether it's repairing, building, restoring bikes. Or over 20 years ago, I used to race motorbikes for a number of years and raced for about 15 years, won about 4 championships, raced in the Isle of Man TT for a couple of years, and I just love it. I've had to temper it a bit as I've got a bit older. I was quite a scary thing on the track, I believe. People didn't like riding too close to me.
Yeah, I remember the stories when you said that you were riding the Isle of Man, was it, right?
Isle of Man, yeah. I did what's known as the Manx Grand Prix a year. It wasn't very successful, if I'm honest. I had quite a lot of breakdowns, but I rode in what's known as the classic Isle of Man TT, which was positioned on a road circuit on the south of the island, and I think the best result I got there was about a 6th place, and that's out of 65 starters. And believe me, I didn't spend a lot of money on my bikes. In the 15 years, I probably spent about £75,000 on riding motorcycles, and you could honestly say the top guys are spending 200,000 or 300,000 on it. And this is not your top class world superbike guys. These are just national champion guys. People put a lot of time and effort into it. In fact, I'll tell you what, a little story, a very, very quick story I have, and it sets it up really for, you've called your little show the Screwup Exchange, and there was one screw up that I did make, and I'll put it really brief, but basically it was coming towards the end of a season it's around about 97. I was still working at Toyota, and I was starting to find it quite difficult to actually race because of the time that it takes to set the bike up and everything else. And basically over that period of time, it was at the end of the season. It was in October. And it was the last race before the end of the championship. And I'd won the championships the year before, and I was keen to try and win it again. But the reality was I made a real cock up in practice. It was raining, the bike wasn't handling very well, and I tried to push a bit hard. I had an almighty crash, probably around about 120 mile an hour, and the bike was all smashed. It had slid across the grass, across the gravel into a bank, smashed all the fairing, took the screen off, broke various levers off, bent the forks. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I borrowed bits, I got bits, and I put it all back on again. And I have a particular style when I'm riding motorbikes, is I prepare for it really, really well. And I guess I do that in life anyway. And I prepare for my racing by my mental state, and I prepare in my physical state in the way that I managed and prepared the bike. So I was a bit disappointed that I couldn't have the bike that I wanted to race on that particular thing, but we got it fixed and I got it up. I started the race and I was second to last on the grid, but I was fifth into the first corner. That's how charged I was towards doing a good job. And I worked my way through, and eventually about 2 laps from the end, I ended up being about third. And I was thinking, do you know what? I could actually win this race. And if I won the race, I would have won the championship. As it happens, I didn't. I didn't win the race. I ended up being second. I overran a couple of times in a couple of corners. And so I just didn't really get it. And so I lost the championship by 2 points, which was very, very frustrating. But the learning for me was how sometimes you just got to let things happen. I was trying to force having a better bike, but once I actually got into the race and I just let it happen and I just went with the flow, I found that there was times when I was racing in that race that I felt like I was floating across the track. It was almost like I couldn't imagine, and I can't even remember half the race. I can only remember 1 or 2 corners because I was so engaged and so in the zone in the race. I was probably running more on adrenaline and intuition than actually pure skill, if you know what I mean. And that's really set me up quite a lot in a lot of the things I do in my life. I tend to prepare for things and get everything in the right place, both mentally and physically and structurally, and then I just let it go. And I could honestly say 99 times out of 100, it virtually always goes not quite the way I want it, but I can always handle the situation. And that taught me an awful lot in the way that I manage things, so and I think a lot of what we do is about preparing for life and how we do it. And I always think you've got to push hard in life. Life doesn't come easy to you if you sit back. You learn most when you're actually stretched a little bit out of your comfort zone. That's when you grow. When you know your limits and you're pushing against that, that's when you start to be effective at what you do. And it sort of sets me up really, because I have a saying that I use, and I use it a lot and I explain it to people. It's life is actually an experiment. We are born and we have a life, but it's your chance to experiment and see how far you can go. And that's the way I approach pretty well everything.
Very interesting. Go ahead.
That's a really interesting story. So where did you say you screwed up in this race? It seems like you were...
I screwed up by trying too hard in practice. I was really trying to get higher up on the grid than I probably would have been able to achieve. And it was raining. And although I'm used to the bike sliding around a little bit, I just pushed too hard. And to be fair, that's me. That's who I am. I do that, and that's caused me to fall over at later years. And that to me, my screw up, and it's taught me actually that sometimes, and to be fair, there's something that happened in Toyota earlier on in my career before that probably really said to me, do you know what? You shouldn't push so hard. You got to back off sometimes. You got to let things flow a little bit. You got to allow things to fall into place. And it was only really as a result of my experience in Toyota and things like that I've really chilled much more in my later years, and I don't think it's to do with age. I think it's just to do with recognizing that in reality, if you prepare well, things will generally go well. And that's what I put my attention to now. And I allow things to happen. And then I know that I have the capability to manage the situation. In fact, I like nothing better than being put in a really difficult client situation where I actually don't know what to do. And I go back to the raw material that exists in my brain, and there's always a way and a principle that I can fall back on that helps me help that client, through the particular problem that they're working through.
Yeah, very interesting story, Mike. And I think you are in the last couple of years, I met a lot of people, and you are the one, as I said at the beginning, who has this ability and this talent, I would say, to change people's mindset. I experienced on my own this thing. What do you think, what was the reason you got to this point that you can really have this impact on people?
Okay.
You raise motorbikes on one side, so I would not imagine this is like a leadership coach, and then this different style. Maybe.
It is and it isn't. I have hundreds of stories I could tell about various things. When I was 25, I got sent away on a leadership course with a company, British American Tobacco, and I never thought of myself as a leader. I never really considered myself to be anybody who did anything different. I just did what I thought, and I must have had a bit of a sense of what it meant, because at the end of the course, everyone had to write a piece of paper, and you had a piece of paper on your back, and you had to write what you thought of that person and what you'd experienced with that person. And so, in fact, I'll just get it, because I have it on my wall. It means a lot to me. You won't be able to see it, but basically, it's a piece of paper, and it has things on. It says pure leadership, oozes confidence, morale booster, a born organizer, good at delegation, brilliant leader of people, considers everyone's needs, good for the team morale. What's another one? Gives everyone a fair chance, good reasoning, good organizer, always there. Definitely a good leader, has a great sense of humor. I would never have described myself at any of those things personally. And I came home from that course, and it made me think, do you know what? I'd like to do this. I'd like to do this leadership stuff. And I went on and did quite a lot of leadership roles before I even got to Toyota. But my wife said to me, she said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You're a born leader. When you used to go out with the guys on the bikes, and when we used to do the racing," she said, "you were always leading." She said, "It's inside of you." I don't know whether it is or not, but certainly there was something I learned from that. And I don't think leaders are born. I think they experience scenarios that allow them to step up a little bit. And when you see how it all fits, there's a story I could probably tell. I'm a bit nervous about telling it, if I'm honest. And there's a reason why I'm nervous, because it goes back to Toyota, and I guess what I need to sort of put in there is a little bit of a caveat, in the sense of it is a screw up, but it's a screw up on Mike Denison, not a screw up on Toyota. Although the caveat is when you hear the story, you may imagine that Toyota failed me. And I feel uncomfortable about doing that, because I got a high value of Toyota, and the context is that I was the head of machining. I was in charge of their machine shop, and I really value the way Toyota works and how they operate. But let's be honest, they're not a perfect company. No companies are, and a company's only as good as the leaders who are in there. And I learned a lot from the Japanese. But after a couple of years, it became operated more by Western leaders than the Japanese leaders. And this is not a criticism of the Western leaders at all. I completely understand, the way that they lead and what they were doing. And they certainly learned from a number of mistakes and errors of judgment that we made, not just with me, with other things. And it's a great part of the Toyota success story, I think. So when I talk about this particular story, it might look like the experience is negative, or you'd see it in a negative light, but I don't. And the reality is, it's probably more about me as Mike Denison, and how I handled myself and what I believed, and my own character, rather than Toyota's approach to the situation. And there was definitely lessons to be learnt on all sides. So the key points around this screw up, and it's a big screw up, because it's a screw up that messed with my health for a while, is I was head of machining, and I've been in the company a couple of years, and some of you viewers and listeners may even be able to relate to this, because when you get to a leadership position, and certainly the more senior you get, the higher the level of responsibility. And so you always feel like you have to be responsible and there to handle the situations. And I had a large department, it was probably more as 40%, 50% floor space of the actual site. Machining, as you guys were well aware, we made all the components that went into the product. And even though I had 6 lines, I only had about 25 people working with me, the leaders and the team leaders and the team members. And we had a good size operation. The equipment's huge. It's very expensive, very complicated in some cases. We had a line of 6 CNC machines. And the key thing around when you're in charge of a large area like that, you never really feel like you're having a good day. 6 lines, there's always one line that has a problem, either a quality problem, a breakdown of a machine, some little issues going on. And as a leader of that area, you were always being sort of pulled from one end of the line to the other, or one end of the area to the other. And across 6 lines, that's quite a responsibility. So there's always something that needs to be addressed. And when you think about it, it's quite an interesting concept to think that there's so many diverse pieces of equipment and a wide range of area. And of course, we had an andon system, which was constantly flashing and telling us where the issues were going off in the areas. And so I was constantly moving around, and I never really had much of a rest on a day-by-day basis, which is not unusual for anybody in Toyota, don't get me wrong. And you're seldom in a position where you can actually step back and relax, and have all 6 lines running smoothly. I mean, that definitely happened in later years, but in the first 2 or 3 years, as we were trying to get to understand the equipment, it was certainly not the case, and I certainly felt that I had lots of responsibility. And there was a time when Toyota started to produce extra blocks and cranks to send them back to Japan. And at that time, we were running just one shift. Shift started at 8 and ran till 4:30. And I usually got in about 6:30 to set everything up and to have a couple of meetings with people. And then generally I'd be there till 5 o'clock, maybe 5:30 latest. Quite a long day, but a reasonable day. But when we started making additional cylinder blocks and cylinder cranks to send back to Japan, we had to run what we call the split shift. So we ran from 6 in the morning until 2. And then some of the guys came in earlier at 12, and they ran from 12 till 8 o'clock at night. So all of a sudden, my day changed, and we agreed that probably we didn't need another manager to look after the area. So I was operating basically the 2 shifts. So I would get in at half 5, and sometimes I could leave at 6. But more likely than not, during the 6 months that we were doing it, I'd probably be there till 8:30. So 9 o'clock sometimes. So my day was starting to stretch out to being 12 or 14 hours long. And now, don't get me wrong, you can do that for a period of time, but you can't do it indefinitely. And that's what happened. I started to feel a bit tired, but I wouldn't give up on it. I felt that I was responsible. I was supporting the guys. I was, getting used to it. I was getting on with the job. And basically, I was managing it, or I felt I was managing it. I certainly didn't feel that it was having a negative effect on my job as a leader, but it was definitely having a negative effect on my job or my person as a family man, as a person who spent time at home, and certainly not not good for my health. Now, here's the crux. I just would not accept that I couldn't do it. As far as I'm concerned, I wanted to be responsible for both shifts. I'll show them I can manage this. I want to be promoted to the next position. I can manage this. I can easily manage this. So I was pushing myself, and I think I was doing a pretty good job of it. If you were to ask anyone, they would tell you whether I was or not. That's their perspective on it. But I felt I was doing okay. I certainly wasn't being criticised for it. I was being commented on that I should go home more often. So I was certainly being questioned and criticised for that. But regarding the actual job, I was doing a good job. After about 6 months, Toyota decided they were going to move to 2 shifts, a day shift and a night shift. Day shift would operate from 6 till 2, and that shift would then go home, and another shift would come in at 2, and they would run till 10. Okay. I was still the one manager of the area. So I started coming in at 5:30, and I planned to go home at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. But I was finding myself being there sometimes till 12 o'clock at night. And wow, did that see the end of Mike Denison, believe me. Believe me, this was a huge screw up physically and mentally and emotionally for me. I managed it for another 9 months. 9 months of 16, 17 hours a day. Oh, did I screw up big time. I lost it completely on one shift. And I can remember we had a breakdown on one of the lines, and one of the senior managers came in and said, what's happening, Mike? And I said, we got a breakdown on the crankshaft line. And he said, well, what have you done about it? I said, I'm trying to sort these bits out. And he said, no, but what have you done about it? And I thought, what are you shouting at me for? I really lost it big time. And I really blew up at him. And I said, I've been here since 6 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, he said to me, what's your responsibility, Mike? You need to be by this machine. I thought, oh my God, I can't believe what he's telling me. Anyway, I just walked out. I just walked out of the plant. I'd had enough of everything. I walked out, and I'd already struggled to drive home some nights, because when you're that tired, you can't focus on things. And it's not a good thing. I mean, they should have noticed it, but whether they did or not, I don't know. But anyway, there were times when I couldn't drive properly, and I would pull over into a lay-by and I'd fall asleep for an hour, and I'd get home at 2 a.m. My wife wouldn't know where I'd been and what was going on. And she was so upset, and I just said, I can't go back. I really can't go back. Actually, I can feel myself getting a little bit emotional now just talking about it, because it was a very, very bad time for me at that time. And I basically went off sick. I said I had the flu or a cold or something like that. I didn't. So I was very, very low as a person. And I went to the doctors, and the doctors said, yeah, we can sign you off. He said, you've obviously got a level of anxiety. He said, you're clearly worn out, and he signed me off. And actually, after 3 days, the plant manager came to see me actually at my home, and he said, what do you think the situation is? And he said, we've been worrying about you for a long time, Mike. He said, but we weren't really sure because you weren't showing any signs that you were cracking. He said, you weren't showing any signs that you were overwhelmed by it all, but we were talking about it. That's why there was a guy, a senior manager called John, and he said he would go out and he would say, send him home. For God's sake, will you get him home? He can't be here. It's not good for him. But he said, you weren't showing any signs. Anyway, I was off for 3 or 4 weeks. I went back, and they did support me. They put me in a different role. They put me in a role which was actually around about quality, and I had to rewrite a lot of standards, and we reformatted the way we did a lot of our quality checks with the Kamishibai system, and they eventually put me in what's known as the member development program, where I got sent to Burniston, and we studied with a lot of the Japanese about how to train and facilitate learning, and over the next year or so, I gradually got myself back to a good place. But actually, behind the scenes, I'd already started to meditate. I'd already started to study psychology. I'd already had some hypnosis to try and get myself back on an even keel. Toyota didn't know about any of these things. They just knew that I was sort of working my way through various things. But I recognized that actually the mess up was me. The screw up was Mike Denison, not Toyota. You could say they should have noticed it, and you could say they could have done a better job of reinforcing it. But I think the reality was I didn't know my boundaries, and when I speak to my wife, Hillary, she would say, she said, the trouble with you, Mike, is you'll never give up. You'll never give up on anything. She said, you will not give up until you hit a brick wall. That was her statement. And that's exactly what I did at Toyota. But the learning from that for me was incredible, because I just went away and thought, why do people do these sort of things? Why did I do that? What was going on in my head? What was I trying to do? What were my beliefs? What was important to me? And I felt that I needed to understand a lot more about how human beings worked. So when I left Toyota in 97, which was still a couple of years later, I went back into, as I say, the member development, and we did a lot of training and education in the group as we were starting to get back to basics. And in 97, I actually left and went into consultancy. And I've been in consultancy for around about 5 or 6 years, and I enjoyed consultancy to a point, but I didn't like the idea of a lot of consultancy is really about telling people what they should do, often without understanding the context of what they might be struggling with. And so I almost had an empathy for a lot of the leaders that I was working with. And so I was applying more of a coaching style anyway, because a lot of what I'd learned at Toyota. So I went away and I studied coaching, and I eventually left the consultancy, and I set my own coaching business up in 2005. And I really focused on developing how leaders can see themselves through a better lens, helping them to understand who they are as a person, what their values are, what's important to them, what their purpose is in life, what they're trying to achieve in a leadership role. And I recognized that actually there was an awful lot of development I had to do to become a better human being, but also how I could help other human beings. And that's really what I focused on the last 15 years. Since 2005, I've studied psychology, I've studied neuroscience, I've been on courses for NLP, I've been away on retreats, I've been to meditation retreats, I've been to Japan to meditation sessions, I've studied Zen Buddhism, I've took qualifications in coaching, I've studied hypnosis. I even, about 7 or 8 years ago, I went away on a 6-month course to study quantum physics, because I wanted to understand how the world worked. I wanted to understand why we do things. Why do things happen in the world the way that they do? And a large proportion of quantum physics is effectively saying, if you see things with certain eyes, that's what will happen in front of you. Your consciousness can actually have an effect on it. And so that's really what I've done. But the key for me, the big lesson is I now feel I understand human behavior at a level I can help people. And so the screw up for me at Toyota was, it could have gone the wrong way, because when I was ill, I would go for walks around where I live, and I live in a beautiful area, but I couldn't see it. All I was thinking is I can't see a place for me on this earth. I don't want to be here. This is ridiculous. And the only thing that ever stopped me doing anything was actually the fear and the worry about what my family would do without me. That was the only thing that stopped me. And I'm so glad that I didn't, because I think I've added a lot of value since then in different ways. Yes, to some leaders, yes, to some companies, but to friends, to relatives, to nieces, to nephews. They always they'll call me up and they'll say, Mike, I've got a problem with this. My boss is bullying me a little bit. What do you think I should do? And I'll never tell them what to do, but I get them to think about it. So I guess that's a little bit around, what's happened in my life. And, I know that there are many things outside of our lives that we can't control, but there are 3 things that we absolutely can. We can control what and how we think. We can control what and how we feel, and we can control what we decide to do. And unfortunately at Toyota, I didn't set the boundaries of what was reasonable and not reasonable. I don't think I even knew what it was, to be honest, at the time. But story for you. There's probably about 4 or 5 people in the world that know that, and there'll be a lot more now. I hope it helps them recognize that. Actually, do you know what? If you're in a bad place, a really bad place, there's a good place on the other side, because the world works in polarities. Think about it. Everything is in opposite. We have a north and a south. The world spins, so therefore we have natural polarities. Magnetism tells us that there's an opposite to everything. There's good and there's bad. There's high and there's low. There's pluses and there's minuses. So whatever position you're in now, there is a positive. There's a seed of positivity in that. You've just got to find it. And I guess that's a big lesson for me. I think there's a lot we can do to help people see a positive in everything that happens. And excuse me, I guess, you guys know about problem solving. The thing with problem solving is a lot of people see problems as negative because they're painful. It's not what you want to have in front of you. But the reality is, and I never understood this at Toyota, Toyota saw problems as diamonds. They call them gems. And the reason for that is in a diamond is the seed of something good. So in a problem is the seed of the lesson, which makes us wiser as a human being, wiser about the process, wiser about the actual operation itself. So in every problem is the opportunity for learning, and I think that's all about this idea of opposites. In a problem, there is a positive. In a problem, there is an opportunity. And it's not sycophantic. It's not trying to just bull up the positive side to the word. It's the truth. It's how the world works. Sorry about that. I've gone on for far too long. I'm really, really sorry.
No. Well, I mean, I'm very impressed. I mean, it was like so powerful, and thank you, and we appreciate that you shared this with us. And actually, your last topic about this positivity, I was thinking about my time spending with you, and I'm recognizing right now that looking on things in a positive way, it's actually what I learned during the time spending with you in this project and talks and discussions about everything. That's really
thank you for those kind words. I mean, it's important to me to help people. That's where my mind is. At the moment, I haven't had a great deal of work over the last 12 months because obviously, as a lot of people have, I've got 2 or 3 clients. But in that time, I wouldn't say selected, but they've almost self-selected. There's 3 people that I'm actually working with very, very closely, on personal level issues, on business level issues, and on development level issues. Each one is slightly different. And every one of them, I'm doing it effectively for free. Not because, of any other reason than I want to help people. And that, Drasko. We've talked many times on the phone about different things, and I know there's a lot of people who call me up and ask me various things. As far as I'm concerned, I was put on this world to actually help people, and I hope that I can walk away from the world sometime in the future, and someone say, "Do you know what? He was a pretty good guy, that Mike. He was all right."
Well,
more than all right, I would say.
Well, Mike, first of all, thank you so much for sharing this story. It's actually, it hits me a little personal because I've known people that unfortunately did not make it through and committed suicide, but it's really uplifting that you've shared this story and made it public. And I really want to commend you for that. And it's really thank you. And the second thing is what I really, really loved was the message that you were telling people that were thinking about this, that there's always an opposite. There's always, if you're in a dark place, there's always a positive. So I think that will resonate with a lot of people. And so thank you.
My pleasure. There's one last there's one last item I just really want to mention. In Toyota, we learned about the 3 M's. We learned about MUDA, we learned about MURI, and we learned about MURA. I didn't really connect that actually I was in MURI. I was in overburden or overload. And you could say that actually the senior managers weren't recognizing it either. But these are stories that I will sometimes use with various leaders to help them to see what's the impact of MURI on an individual. And you've just explained it very, very well there, Patrick. When a person feels a huge level of overload that they can't cope with life, it's a horrible place to be. I've been close to it, not as horrible as some people, I'm sure. But the reality of that is there is things that we can do around it. And actually, companies do have a responsibility to look for a level of reasonability about what people do. And overloading a machine, overloading a man, it will fail. It has to fail. Nothing is infallible in that way.
I want to get back to this point because I really think it's so powerful message. It's just my hypothesis that on one point you realize, or today you're realizing that you failed in yourself, right? But a lot of people, I can imagine, see this like a failing on their position, and that's why they're keeping pushing themselves and pushing, because nobody wants to fail or to be in somebody's eyes. Or he failed to be a good leader, to be a good employee, whatever. And this is, I think, where we do not stopping, and with the ambitious you are and people who are, this is like keeping you going, and then these things happen. Is this something that you can relate to?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit in my character not to give up on stuff. So I can see where that is, but it's a little bit more than that. It's this idea that failure is negative. I mean, I've completely reframed that word in my language now. Is failure does not exist for me. You can't fail at anything. All you can ever do is learn. So if you do something and it doesn't work, it's actually learning. It's actually getting better if you use it in the right way and you're supported in the right way. And if I think about Toyota and the concept of the way we operated, they had an and-on system. Why did they have an and-on system? It was to allow people to fail. It was to allow people to have mistakes, but then to flag it up. And the and-on pulls somebody to the mistake immediately so we can investigate it, so we can get to the root cause. The company is such a clever company. So, and that's why I can't feel negative about it. For me, I look at it, and this is not a reflection 20 years ago. At that time, I recognized that there was something in me that I let that happen. There was other guys who I was working with in Toyota, and they did have boundaries. And I can remember being in a meeting one time, and the head of the maintenance operation, and he would actually, the meeting had gone on a little bit longer, and it was actually 5:30. And basically, he got up from the meeting and he went to leave, and he said, "I'm really sorry. I have to apologize. I have something to do that I need to attend to, a family thing that I need to attend to." And I can remember the British plant manager at the time turning around and saying, "Where's your commitment?" And we all heard it. Now, I thought to myself, he's never going to say that to me. But actually, this guy was right. The plant manager was wrong. That guy's commitment would have been there if his guys were struggling on a problem, but it wasn't there for a meeting where he could have actually quite easily have picked up on the points from the meeting later on. I made a mistake. I didn't recognize that there's boundaries that you must not let other people cross, but I never set them. So when I walked away from that particular situation and I stepped back and thought about it, the first week or so was actually just a horrible place. The second week, I thought, I've got to do something about this. And the third week was, I'm going to go away and get something. So I booked a hypnosis session with somebody. I went away and I read a couple of books. Within a couple of months, we were going to meditation sessions, and that helped me to get back to a level playing field. And then I recognized that actually I needed to understand myself better as a person. And that's what I did. And I think people struggle in life because they don't know who they are as a person. They basically become a puppet for somebody else. And reality is that you are your own person. You can be whatever you want to be, but you have to know who you are first and where you want to get to, and set your boundaries.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
So I have a sort of question regarding about MUDA, MURI, and MURA.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff out there about MUDA, like tools to recognize. The same thing with MURA.
Mm-hmm.
What about MURI? Like what did Toyota teach you about like how to recognize overburdenedness, or even in the person and the machine, or like even just some warning signs, like just so people can be aware of, like, I don't think it's a really big topic that's been talked about.
It isn't a big topic. In fact, both MURI and MURA are quite overlooked in lots of companies. There's all the attention on MUDA. But I see MURI and MURA as being basically leadership or management wastes, because in reality, they're the ones who can see them far, far greater than the operator, I believe. So I think they're often missing. We were told about it. We were educated in it. We were talked about it. There was a bigger emphasis on MURA, on the emphasis of flow and about leveled, head junker and leveling the operation. But actually, MURI and overburden, it's an interesting one, because I can remember talking about it a little bit from a point of view of you can't overburden the equipment. But I did an analysis when I was at Toyota, and the idea behind it was, this is probably the only thing I can think of where I got a real insight. And it was actually after my issue or my screw up. And we were doing an analysis to say, could we operate one of the two machining lines with one team leader? So you would have a wider scope. And basically what we did was we actually did a lot of following the team leader around so we could assess his job in a great deal of detail. I call it day in the life of now. But basically, we were following these two team leaders around, and we could understand their work, and we could understand where they were very, very busy and the times of day that they were busy. And basically, when we looked at it, we could have moved to one team leader over two lines. It would have been the crankshaft, the Conrod line, and the cylinder block line. But basically, it was actually 1 1/3 team leader's role, not two. But the 1 1/3 was still an overburden. So we had to change their work to get it down to 1.01 of an activity. And then it became realistic that he could manage it realistically. And that taught me that actually you need to look at how people work and their working pattern and their job and the scope of their work. And you can only do that by going to the Gemba. You can only do that by measuring it. If we'd have given that team leader the 1 1/3 of the job across two lines, you can be absolutely certain something would have happened. He wouldn't have been available to respond to an andon, or there would have been a quality check missed, or he may well have missed, a tool change at a particular critical time. There would have been something that happened which caused an issue. So I think that's what I learned, but we never actually did a lot of exercises around understanding that level of overburden. No, actually, I tell a lie. I guess the other thing was when we were doing a lot of smooth working, people's movements in their job, more on the assembly line than the machining lines. But we did a lot of analysis around could the person manage that level of work at that pace? And we recognized that actually sometimes not. And in fact, in the early days, the first couple of years, we Kaizen that much waste out that we actually introduced almost like a repetitive strain, because the person didn't have enough relaxation in their movements, and we had to go back to a previous way of running the line. So we did look at it. We did look at it. Certainly a lot more advanced than a lot of other companies that I've seen. A lot of companies still don't really get those two wastes.
It's really interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hope it helps.
Everything helps from you, Mike, always. I have just one final topic that I would like to ask you if you want to share. I remember when I came to the Cleveland truck manufacturing plant of Freightliner, after you have been there and coached Jane, and I think also Mike, the plant manager in those days.
Yeah.
Somebody showed me Jane's office.
Yeah.
And the wall in Jane's office.
Yeah.
I think you can describe it much better than my English is not good enough to describe this masterpiece of art, I would say.
Did you take a picture of it?
I think, but unfortunately, I lost the pictures from my phone. And
Okay.
I didn't have, but I need to ask Phil if he has.
Yeah, I know. There was 3 pictures in Jane's office. Jane was the operations director for the site, and I coached her for 6 months, full time virtually, to try and get her not up to speed, to try and get her to really fully engage the idea of the leader as a coach and the leader as a Gemba manager, really get it engaged. And I think it was a big success, if I'm honest. Certainly Roger Nielsen implied that it was. So there was 2 big flip charts in 3 big flip charts in a wall. One was the full scope of lean, and everything, and it all linked in together. It was like a huge mind map. There was another one which was one of the plans around. I think it basically showed a roadmap through every member's, not literally every member, but how a member to a team leader, to a supervisor, to a manager, to a senior manager, to a plant manager, a roadmap of their learning journey and all the various, learning skills that they needed to have on that journey. And then the last one was another flip chart, which was a little bit like a reverse fishbone diagram. And it was basically, I asked her the question, and it was a brainstorming session that I did with her. And I said, okay, Jane, if you wanted to build in quality, what are the inputs to building quality? Give me all the inputs. And so we were looking at the inputs to do with the man, the machine, the method, the environment, the materials, the management system, all those various things. And so it blew her mind. There's something in the region of around 150 to 200 inputs to good building and quality processes. It goes right back to design engineering. It goes back to having an and-on. It goes back to having good standardized work, to job instruction. It goes into the idea of how we solve problems to get to root cause. It goes into the idea about how we have a stop call wait system, about how you manage the line so it doesn't slow the line, how you have buffers. They're all inputs to building quality in. It was quite an insight. But it wasn't just Jane. It was Jane and 2 or 3 of her engineers. So I really do hope that some people have taken that away and started to use it to good effect in the organization.
I mean, we just need to add, Jane came from the HR department, right, from Portland,
yeah,
and she took
did.
over this operations position, and this is why you've been there to support her on this transition, right?
I know.
To operations, and she's now the general director of the Saltillo plant in Mexico. So
I know, what a success story for Jane. I mean, don't get me wrong, Jane is an incredible leader. Anyway, I was very fortunate to spend time, and I learned as much in that period of time from Jane as I think probably Jane learned from me. So it was a very definite, and I still keep in touch with her. We talk probably 2 or 3 times a year. I've been over actually when she was last in Mount Holly. I was over there for a couple of weeks with her, through the year, and she still asks for a little bit of moral support. I think she knows what to do now. It's more moral support I think she needs.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike, for sharing these interesting stories. I think we could talk forever. There are so many stories you have to share with us.
Yeah.
But maybe we can get back together with you at another time and see what else you can share with the people.
Sure. Sure.
Thank you very much from my side.
Yep,
my pleasure. Yeah, anytime. I mean, just a very quick one. I'm in the process at the moment of writing. I've been writing for 5 years. I've been writing this book that I want to get out there, and it'll happen this year. It'll definitely happen this year, and it sits around a product that I've currently got. Have you ever come across these before? Do you know what these are?
Yeah, yeah, the cubicle.
Rubik's Cube. Well, I think leadership's a little bit like this. There's 6 sides to it. And you've got to be able to manage the puzzle in the right way, because if you turn it in the wrong way, you just lose your control, you lose your way. And that's exactly what lean leadership's all about. I think it's very easy to lose the way. So I'm using this as a little bit of a metaphor, but I'll let you know when the book's nearly done, and maybe we can have a conversation then.
Definitely. That sounds like a really cool insight, and I'm sure a lot of people would really be interested into it. So
thank you. It's really great to see you guys. I really, it's a shame actually that it's this distancing situation, because we need to catch up again sometime soon. Maybe before the end of the year we can make it happen.
Definitely, would love that.
Okay, guys.
Yeah. So thank you very much. And just for everybody in the audience, this was Mike Denison. He is the LeanMentor company, and he was gracious enough to let us pick his brain on the Screwup exchange. Thank you.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed it. You take care, guys. See you again soon.